Reductive Technique, one of the cornerstone processes of painting in the Grimdark style. This technique can be applied to both solvent and acrylic-based paints as a means of selectively removing an applied layer of medium for some varied, interesting and profound effects. In today's video, I'll walk you through the reductive process itself, how it's achieved, the various reductive methods for both enamel and acrylic paints, and cover some of the common misconceptions and potential pitfalls associated with the technique. I am Black Chalice Studio, and you are watching the Grimdark Compendium. So, what is the reductive technique? In its simplest form, it is the removal of a previously applied layer of paint via the use of a suitable solvent and a reductive tool. To perform the reductive technique on solvent-based paints such as enamels and oils, we will use mineral spirits, and for acrylic-based paints, we will use isopropyl alcohol 99%. For the reductive tool itself, we have a variety of options, ranging from the most common Q-tip through to brushes and sponges. When working with solvents, especially if used through an airbrush, the use of suitable precautions such as adequate ventilation, gloves and a respirator are advised. One of the most common misconceptions regarding the reductive technique is that varnish should be applied to the miniature, especially before the use of enamels. This is simply a myth and will add no further protection to the underlying layers of paint, especially the use of an acrylic varnish. A gloss varnish can be applied before enamel washes, but this is only to aid capillarity, allowing the wash to run into the crevices more easily. For the purpose of today's video, I won't be using any form of varnish. There are a couple of factors that can affect the reductive technique process, which we'll look at in a little more detail later in the video. These factors are the dilution level of the paint we apply, the amount of time we wait after application before beginning the reductive process, and the introduction of heat. So now we've covered the basics, let's move on to showing the process behind the reductive technique. To start with, I made some blanks to practice on and textured them slightly before priming and painting them with a simple two-stage blue-grey fade. Our enamel wash here is Villainy and Goon's Grime, and our solvent is mineral spirits. I just use the cheapest hardware store spirits that I can find. To begin with our enamel reductive process, I'm going to apply an even, neat layer of Goon's Grime to the test blank. I apply this slowly by brush, but an airbrush is a quicker and more efficient way. Touching upon the previously mentioned use of heat, I'll come in with a blow dryer on medium heat for around 30 seconds here. This will help flash off the solvent in the Goon's Grime, slightly accelerating the curing time. Here we will come in with the most basic form of the reductive technique. I'll load up a Q-tip with mineral spirits and gently begin reactivating the wash. The mineral spirits will interact with the enamel wash, allowing us to selectively remove this from the areas that we choose. You'll notice here that I use soft tapping and dabbing motions with the Q-tip. This is key here, as Q-tips are fairly abrasive in nature. The second tool we can use for the reductive technique is the humble brush. This method allows for a more controlled removal, letting us clean hard to reach areas and achieve some really nice mottled effects. The principle is the same as when using a Q-tip. We'll load the brush up with some spirits and begin dabbing at the wash, reactivating and removing it from our chosen areas. With the brush, we can also use some soft downward strokes to create streaking. I like to use a Q-tip for a general removal pass, and then a brush for more detailed application. Be aware though that it is also possible to remove the underlying layers of acrylic if we're too rough here. Another popular tool for the reductive technique is the sponge. I see quite a lot of people using makeup sponges, but I'm just using an offcut of old packing sponge here. This method is very similar to the Q-tip and gives a similar result without leaving behind any of the tiny fibres which are commonly found when using Q-tips. Another approach we can use with Q-tips is what I like to call the wet and dry technique. For this, we'll dampen one end of the Q-tip with spirits, gently reactivate the wash with this side, then quickly swap to the dry end to remove the wash. This method allows for some extremely smooth blends and more control than the single-sided technique. I'll just let the video play here for a moment so you can see the technique in action. With the basics of the enamel reductive technique covered, let's apply them to something other than a test blank. These fantastic 3D printed Grimdark terrain pieces were kindly given to the Compendium by Soulslike Creations, and what better test piece to use for our purposes here. First up, we'll brush apply a 1-to-1 unifying wash of goons, grime and decrepit filth. Next up, we'll come in with our blow dryer on medium heat for around 60 seconds, just to flash off the solvents in the unifying wash. I wanted the sandbags to be relatively clean here, so I came straight back in with the basic reductive pass using Q-tips loaded with spirits. Because we didn't give the enamel wash long to cure, this reductive pass removes most of the wash, leaving a fairly clean look. And to take care of any areas we couldn't reach with the Q-tips, we just swapped over to a brush and spirits. I loaded the bristles fairly heavily here, so the unifying wash was nice and easy to remove. Whilst I had the brush on hand, I also went in and did a more focused cleaning pass, this time with a lightly loaded brush. Here I concentrated on the skulls, corpses, rats and other small details that I wanted to have a fairly clean look. Moving on to the masonry, I wanted this to have a pretty grungy and dirty finish, so I gave the unifying wash around half hour to cure before coming back in with a basic reductive pass once again, using spirits and Q-tips. To add some visual interest and differentiate certain areas of stone from the others, I came in here with the wet and dry reductive pass. This technique also allows us to create some nice, subtle, mottled effect on certain areas of the stone. And finally, I waited another 15 minutes, then came in with a brush lightly dampened with spirits to gently feather the wash away from the raised areas of the metallic details, leaving the crevices nice, dark and dirty. And the last step for this piece here is to come in with some tweezers and remove any fibres left behind from our use of Q-tips. You'll find these little guys everywhere, just take your time. Make sure to get rid of all of them. And with the unifying wash and reductive passes complete, this piece is ready for detailing, effects and further weathering. Now we'll move on to showing the reductive technique performed over acrylics. The methods themselves are similar to those performed on enamels, but for acrylic filters and washes we need isopropyl alcohol, ideally 99%. We also use the same Q-tips and a brush as when performing the reductive technique on enamel paints. For our acrylic filter, we're going to use GW Colia Green Shade, applied over a few thin layers through an airbrush at around 25 psi. We're just gradually going to build up the saturation here. Following this, we're going to come back in with our blow dryer once again, medium heat for around 30 seconds, just so it looks dry to the touch. For this test, I'm going to use a spritz bottle to lay the isopropyl alcohol onto the surface. Isopropyl is an extremely strong solvent, and when performing the reductive technique over acrylics, we need to take even more care than when using enamels and spirits. The chance of stripping through layers is very apparent, but with a soft touch and a careful approach, we can avoid such situations. With the isopropyl alcohol applied, we come in with a Q-tip and very gently remove the acrylic filter from our chosen areas. We want to use the same soft, deliberate tapping and dabbing motions, concentrating on one area at a time, and then moving on. Here's an example of just how easily isopropyl alcohol can chew through acrylic paint. You can see that with the scrubbing motion, it almost immediately rubs through the acrylic layers on top, down to the primer, and then eventually down to the plastic itself. An alternative method to the spritz bottle is lightly loading a brush with isopropyl and then reducing the acrylic filter through gentle dabbing of the surface. When isopropyl alcohol reacts with an acrylic filter, it causes it to separate and draw apart, as you can see here. This allows us to create some really amazing mottled effects, with the underlying acrylic layers showing through the broken, faded and transparent filter above. As with enamels, we can also come back in with repeat passes to clean away the filter more in certain areas. I like to work one area at a time for the first pass, then move on and come back for a second and sometimes third pass to refine the effect. On this blank, you can see the kind of mottled finish that you can achieve due to the interaction between isopropyl and the acrylic filter we applied. We have varying levels of transparency, a patchy, almost blotchy finish in certain areas, and a very smooth transition between the filter and underlying colour. These effects can add a ton of visual interest onto our miniatures. And one final time, just to show you, this is how easy it is to scrub through acrylics when using isopropyl alcohol, this time with a brush. So just take your time, go slowly and with a soft hand, and you'll do just fine. So, now that we've looked at the reductive process for both enamels and acrylics, let's apply them to a miniature to see the effect that a reduced acrylic filter and enamel unifying wash can have. I primed this Primaris Marine in black, then applied several zenithal layers of light grey for a neutral base coat. Our first step is a filter of Colia green shade through the airbrush. This is applied mainly to the undersides of the volumes to add a cooler tone. As soon as this filter looked dry to the touch, I came in with a Q-tip lightly dampened with isopropyl alcohol and began gently breaking up the filter. I concentrated more on the upper, border areas, aiming to create a smooth transition between filter and base coat, leaving some of the green on the lower portions and in the crevices. I also came back in with a brush after my initial Q-tip pass, just to add some mottling to certain areas like the lower parts of his greaves. Here you can see the subtle mottling effect and smooth transitions achieved on a curved surface like Primaris power armor. After giving the acrylic filter around an hour to dry, I came in with a neat, unifying wash of Goon's Grime. The warmer tone here will contrast really nicely with the cool Colia green shade, adding some visual interest to the miniature. I applied this as a nice even layer before coming in with a blow dryer on medium heat to flush off any solvents in the wash. I gave the unifying wash around 15 minutes before coming back in for a basic reductive pass using Q-tips dampened with spirits. My aim here is just to remove the wash from the raised areas, leaving it more prominent in the crevices. You can see the nice, cool, mottled filter we applied earlier being revealed from beneath the Goon's Grime. I'll let the video play for a moment here, just so you can see the technique in action. Here's a demonstration of the wet and dry technique on this guy's head. I'll make a few taps with the side of the Q-tip dampened with spirits just to reactivate the wash, then quickly swap to the dry side to absorb and feather away the excess, creating a very smooth blend between the upper surfaces and crevices. Our last step here is going to be coming back in with those tweezers and removing all those little bits of fuzz left behind from our Q-tip usage. If you find some that are quite difficult to remove with tweezers, just come in with a brush loaded with a tiny bit of spirits, and this should allow you to pick them off the miniature. Let's go a little further and show a couple of effects you can achieve using the reductive technique. As you can see here, I've brought the other areas of the miniature up to the same level as the armour. I want to imply some built-up weathering and staining here to the lower greaves and feet, so to start with I came in with a slightly thin filter of Goon's Grime. After a quick blow dry, I waited around 10 minutes before coming in for the reductive pass. Using a Q-tip lightly dampened with spirits, I begin gradually reactivating and breaking up the filter at the highest point and start working my way down towards the bottom, where I want the stronger effect. I make very deliberate motions here, focusing on creating a broken, patchy and mottled look. This kind of effect can add a ton of visual interest with a translucent, soft and varied finish. I find this process a lot of fun, and with a little practice you can achieve some really intricate results. Once I've got the mottling to a point I'm happy with, I'll come back in for a refining pass, cleaning up the uppermost areas and a few edges as well. One last technique we can look at today is the dry reductive method. First up, I added a thin glaze of sector rust to the black weapon casings. This is one of my favourite methods of rendering an old, dusty and reddish hue onto black areas. Once applied, I'll hit it with a blow dryer briefly and then come back in for the reduction. Using a dry Q-tip, I gently begin removing the filter from the raised areas of the casings. I go slowly here, focusing more on the hard edges and uppermost areas, aiming to leave that reddish tint in the crevices. When I base coated these areas, I used Abaddon Black, which has a slight satin sheen. By removing the filter from the raised areas using the dry Q-tip method, we reveal that sheen once more, creating visual interest and surface finish variation between the dead matte crevices and satin edges. And here we have the end result, combining the cool, mottled acrylic filter, warmer enamel unifying wash, extra mottling via reductive filters and surface finish variation. Thank you for watching. I hope this video has answered any questions you may have and given you some inspiration to try these fundamental techniques for yourself. For many other tutorials like this, covering a wide range of effects and techniques, head on over to the Grimdark Compendium. If you make your way over there now, you still have time to grab some fantastic deals on our biblical Trench Crusade courses. I bid you a good week, keep it grim, and I'll see you next time.